Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer. And before we get into today's episode, I have a quick message from our sponsor.
This episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by D3 Digital Media Marketing. Dive into the digital world with confidence and creativity on your side. D3 Digital Media Marketing is your all-in-one solution for making a lasting impact online. From the vibrant, engaging world of social media marketing, podcasts, and webinars to the strategic depths of website development, SEO, pay-per-click, email, and content marketing, we tailor our approach to fit your unique brand story. Let's elevate your presence, connect with your audience, and drive success together. Your digital journey starts here. Visit d3digitalmedia.com to learn more.
In this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is Dr. Patrick Hurley. Dr. Hurley is the VP of Marketing at EndoSound, and he brings 13 years of experience in medical device product management and marketing management, along with a Ph.D. in biology specializing in neuroscience. So with that, welcome, Dr. Hurley. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And I look forward to diving in a little bit more in terms of you and your background, as well as what you do at EndoSound. Before we get into that, you want to tell everybody sort of what led you to focus on, medical devices, and especially your background in device marketing?
Sure. Yeah, and happy to. So, it's not a typical road for a PhD. You might know this, Don. It's not a typical road to get into marketing, and you don't necessarily need a scientific or neuroscience degree or any kind of heavy degree in science to get into marketing. But that's just kind of how it played out. So when I was going through my degree and working through my dissertation, I just kind of realized that life was not for me. There's lots of reasons, and that's probably a whole show in itself, but it'll only be appealing to maybe, 2% of your people. But wasn't something for me. I did go ahead and do a brief postdoc at the NIH for a bit. And there are lots of things that I really enjoyed about it. And those things are kind of a small subset of what you actually do in that degree. And they were really like hypothesizing, problems that we were trying to solve, talking about big picture ideas, and just the general idea of being and thinking through a problem, not grinding away. So I got interested in bench to bedside, and I did a number of things. I like bench to bedside because it's kind of entrepreneurial, and it seemed like, again, there's no blueprint for anybody coming out that doesn't do a postdoc and go straight into academia. You got to think of other things. And so I tried all kinds of stuff in the early part of my career. I worked for a CRO, which is a contract research organization, for a bit, and it was a job where I got exposed to how clinical trials, and in this case, oncology clinical trials were run. And I did that for a bit of time, and then I got into a consulting gig. I networked a lot when I was in the areas that I was in. So I was in DC for a little while and in Denver for a little while. And Denver at the time was really, there was a burgeoning sort of life sciences incubator that was growing, and a lot of people in my age group who had left academia and wanted to try something else all kind of got together. And I worked for a consultant group for like 3.5 years, but there I was exposed to a lot of stuff that was completely business related, even though everything that we did was life sciences. So it was life science heavy. The jargon was heavy, but we did all kinds of different indications, from nephrology to neurology, and we even did some health economic stuff. So that work essentially led me to continue to network and grow my body of knowledge of like, how do I do some aspects of marketing? And I got a job with Gambro pretty early in 2012, which was at the time a company that dealt with kidney care, so both acute and chronic. And then I just kind of went on from there.
No, that's, I mean, it is a very interesting thing how people collect different skills and then sort of say, lay it out on the table. Okay, so what do these things get me at the end of the
Right.
day? And
Right.
your education carries you so far, oftentimes. But I do find it interesting. So I mean, having a PhD in biology, how does it really help you? I guess in terms of how you
Sure.
think about medical device marketing.
You know, I first and foremost, I think what you get with a doctorate, and again, I'm not saying that everybody needs a doctorate to do this, but what you do get is kind of a a method to think, and it provides you with um, again, lack of a better way to think about it, a scientific method to put any problem in front of you and to work through its challenges. So I think that in itself, it kind of taught me how to think very deliberately and methodically. But also, here's some really things that you wouldn't necessarily think of. I kind of get some credibility with doctors when they find out that I have a doctorate. Now, then we start talking about a little bit what I did, and so far, it's so far from removed from what I used to do or what I do now that it's hard for me to like conjure up and tell them the details. And some of them are asking serious details about what I did, in the laboratory. But it does give this sort of foot in the door um, kind of um, kind of credibility that is really nice. And often we get very technical, medical, and clinical related to the field that I was in when I was doing different fields. So I think that's for sure one thing. I think it also lends a lot of assistance when I'm interacting with engineering, clinical, the medical units in any business. They all know that I'm a bit more technically minded, analytically minded, and so that kind of allows me to either participate in some of those activities or at least have a more in-depth conversation with some of those activities. Sometimes they come ask me for advice, even though I'm still the marketer. So I give them the high view, but I think that's certainly some of the things that I've touched on. I think the other thing that I would bring up is marketing in itself is kind of the hub of the business, and you got to know a lot of aspects of the business. I mean, arguably there are other uh, business units that would say that they're the hub, but really I've been exposed to this long enough where marketing really is, and that is important too because you get exposed to all these different parts of the business, and you got to collate all kinds of different inputs into making a coherent plan.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I do agree on the troubleshooting aspect of, having a PhD, and it's funny to me because when I think about sort of exiting, the sort of exit criteria for being a PhD is you finish your dissertation process, and I feel like I did the most troubleshooting there,
For sure.
because you sort of worry. At least I had a background worry, like don't put in all this work, and now essentially I just got to make sure that at the end of the day that the dissertation process results in something.
Yep.
I don't want to wind up with a very nicely written paper that goes nowhere.
Yep.
So,
For sure. For sure.
yeah. So what really motivated you to transition, from life sciences consulting to product and market management?
Sure. As a um, as a consultant, you get exposed to all kinds of different aspects of a business, so you don't really get to choose that much. We were very specialized in the fact that we did life sciences, medical device, a lot less pharma, but a lot more medical device. And most of the time, the folks who were hiring us were marketeers. And I remember I was really naive in the beginning, and I remember like one marketeer, like he laid out what he needed, and I was like, how do they not know? Like this is like core to their business. And little did I know, 10 years later, they just simply ran out of bandwidth. Like they needed consultants to do like these side projects that they always need for those additional inputs. And and I didn't realize that, of course, until I was sitting in that seat. And so it was just a sort of a funny sort of full circle kind of story. But I liked where, again, them being the hub of the business, being exposed to all kinds of different parts of the business. And I'll be honest too, there's a heavy analytical, heavy research component to marketing. So like any good marketing plan starts with market research and knowing your market, developing those hypotheses that not only come from the research, but even prior to that. So it was in my mind, like they're very similarly linked, as we were talking about before. Some of those skills that you get as a PhD, they really apply to all kinds of different, all kinds of different roles.
Yeah. Yeah, I do find though that I mean, just a quick aside as well, that I find that there are a fair amount of people that either go for, they get an MD or a PhD, one of the two, and then they
Yep.
sort of say, hey, look, I want business education as well. So they'll go back and get an MBA as well.
Yep.
I tell everybody, look, I took the longest path in my education possible, because each time I sort of said, that's it, no more. So I got an associate's degree and no more. And next thing you know, I'm getting a bachelor's. And then, of course, the group of people that I got my bachelor's with, they said, hey, look, they're all going on for their MBA. And so why not? You may as well join in. And then I fell in love with education after getting my MBA, and just was like, look, I think whenever I get older, whenever I decide that I don't want to do this kind of thing anymore, and run the rat race anymore, maybe I could go teach somewhere. Who knows? And so that was kind of my path and process. It was not the traditional sort of, hey, look, I'm going to go do this for a very purposeful,
Right.
thought provoked reason. I instead sort of took this long path and just said, hey, look, I'm gonna do this, and then that's it, no more.
There were many times where I was sorry to cut you off, Don. There were many times where I thought about an MBA too. I mean, it came up all the time. The more I worked, the less it became necessary, because I was picking up skills. Take a week course here at Northwestern, take a course here, have some internal programs that some companies did, that put on that taught you how to write a marketing plan. So, and when you take advantage of some of those things, that you can really learn a ton.
Yeah. And
So I'm totally with you. Sorry.
I do think more than anything, I mean, even more than, I don't know, formal education, I think, comes into play whenever you're initially trying to get that start and people are establishing kind of where are you and can you do these sort of things. I think certainly credentials help, like you said earlier.
They do.
But at the same time, immersing yourself in doing the thing that you need to do, whether it's marketing or, being an entrepreneur or building startups or whatever it might be, immersing yourself in that, honestly turns out to be a better education than anything books can provide. Because I think life experience is a great teacher.
100%. 100%. And hey, just add one more thing that was, as I was thinking about what got me also interested in marketing. I have seen the leaders in some of the big companies. They typically, and when I'm talking leaders, I'm talking officers. I'm not looking to be an officer in a Fortune 100 company or Fortune 50 company, but at some point, that's sort of the end goal for me, is to head into that direction in a full leadership role. But they often come from sales and marketing, and and again, I think because those two spaces, and there's maybe one other, but we won't mention. But those two spaces often, those folks go into those greater roles where they can influence the company.
Couldn't agree more. So if you look at your overall career, what was a pivotal moment or project for you that significantly shaped your career trajectory?
Sure. I've been the lead, or I've been significantly involved in lots of product launches. Like many though, like there's not that time if you think to any kind of like inspirational movie where like the protagonist is sitting and agonizing over his desk or their desk, and they've got this problem, and there's some breakthrough, and I always wanted one of those. I never had one. I always wanted one, but it never happened. So it's really just sort of a grind, a concerted, methodical effort over time that I think has been the only major teacher. There's a lot of times along that route that I've learned not, what not to do. We've had some. I've had some product launches that were a full swing, let's call it, for the fence, and that can be very rewarding, like it is when you hit a home run, or it cannot. So it's a challenge, and home runs don't happen every at bat. So that's a big challenge. But there was one
Absolutely.
thing I think, like I was kind of alluding to before, that really helped form what I do now, which was this we had this course at a company that I worked for several years ago, and they went all in on teaching marketing plans because they did some internal market research, and the marketers all said we need more education. So they went all in, and they brought some great speakers, experts, and we did like a massive crash course in how to write a marketing plan over the course of a week. It was like a super intense week, like one of those weeks where we're up at 8 and we go to bed at 2, like every night. I'm not kidding. And it's because like we learn all day and then we try to apply everything towards the night. And it was great. It was a week I think about all the time, and I took from that really a lot of my approach to how I begin a marketing plan. There's all kinds of things I've learned since then, but the backbone is from
Very good. So tell me a little bit about EndoSound. Who
there.
are they? What products do you have?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the company.
Yeah, EndoSound it's a small startup in the GI space. Our mission, so to speak, is enhancing access, reducing cost, and increasing safety of endoscopic ultrasound procedures. So endoscopic ultrasound is a niche procedure performed by very skilled endoscopists. So if we need to go back, certainly can do that, but they are highly trained, and essentially you're doing ultrasound inside the body to get pictures of some of the major GI structures that are inside the body. So it's usually an upper GI. So it's a device that rides on the back of an existing endoscope, but it provides essentially what one of my lead engineers says, hot rods an endoscope, and makes it into a fully functioning endoscopic ultrasound. And once it's in the body, you can look at all these various structures. One of the reasons why this idea came about was current EUS technology is really expensive. It does break quite a bit, but it's super expensive. So that means its access is kind of limited into where it can go. It's almost all the tertiary centers where most of the EUS performed, but a lot of the procedures could be done in a different setting. In particular, like an ambulatory surgical center. So the push from CMS and payers has always been to try to get more and more things out to ambulatory surgical centers because the costs are low. So the reason it hasn't been out there, one of the main reasons, is because the costs have been too high with traditional systems. But now we have a system that in many respects follows that blueprint of what a disruptive technology is, because we're doing a lot of the same things that an expensive system can do, but we're doing it less expensive, and we're doing it in a setting where they simply aren't.
Yeah, to think about this thing and describe it to people a little bit. It looks like it piggybacks right on top of an endoscope, clips on the end, and then has like
You
a
got it.
little transducer piece that sticks out from the very
Got it.
end. I mean, I can only imagine how small that ultrasound transducer actually is. Who knows? I don't really know how big ultrasound transducers normally are, but yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like it's really small, and looks like it just fits right naturally right on the back of an endoscope.
It does, and ultrasound devices, depending on where they're used or how they're used, can vary in size. Obviously, you want to try to keep it as small as possible when you're doing an upper GI procedure. And that is one of the things that is paramount for us, is to try to keep the footprint. But you can't make it too small, because if it's too small, it doesn't have the clarity and the image quality that you need to be able to discern structures, vessels, abnormalities, etc.
Very good. So let's talk a little bit about your role. So as a VP of
Sure.
marketing, what are your primary responsibilities and goals?
Yeah, so it's a small company, right? So I'm the VP of marketing, but I do all kinds of different stuff. But I'm responsible for brand, tone, reputation, both the product development upstream and downstream from a marketer's perspective. I came in and installed what is standard segmentation, targeting, positioning, and messaging. So refined our messaging to be more in line with what the customers want. We do a ton of digital, and again, it's a department of one. So I'm both setting the strategy, but I'm also doing a lot of the tactical stuff. So everything from posts in LinkedIn to videos, and organizing how we do those videos with experts. We can do outside user groups and focus groups. So it's a busy role. I also do a lot of things outside of typical marketing, and I don't think anybody's, the old adage of, you wear a lot of hats when you're when you're in a startup. It's true. It's totally true. So I just want to keep that cliche going. But as a scientist, like, I'm tapped for a lot of technical things. So I've done a lot of technical writing. I've done a lot of technical design, and I've even been sort of the lead on our human factors engineering program. So I had to learn what that was in many respects. I knew what it was because, like I said, marketing is often exposed to a lot of these things, but they aren't the lead. But I knew what it was, and I knew enough to get dangerous. And with, of course, a lot of help and guidance, we ran a human factors engineering program for our 510K. So yeah, and then of course, I set the tone and the strategic marketing plan as well. So there's a lot.
Yeah, I feel like the smaller the company is, the closer the closer the separation is between strategy and tactics, right? So
For sure.
the smaller the company, all of a sudden those two things can overlap, and the same person, all of a sudden is doing it. The more the company grows, those two things may separate at times.
Yep.
You also could come together at times. It just sort of it's an interesting dynamic that I'm seeing over time, that you have people that have to be able to, I guess the phrase I used in the last podcast was phase shift. You have to be able
Yep.
to say, hey, look, I'll be today I'll strategic think, or in this hour or minute or whatever, I'll strategic
Yep.
think, and then all of a sudden, okay, so I got to go, do something that's much more, hands-on or execution focused.
For sure. Yeah. In my first roles, when I was at these other companies, these bigger companies, they were all tactical level. I got some dabbling in the strategic side, and I told them that's where I wanted to go. But the tactical level stuff, you had to execute on first. As I grew into more responsibility in the last role, before I took this one at EndoSound, was much more strategic, and I had a team that could implement a lot of the tactical things, but I was still doing some of the tactical things too. But here at EndoSound, yeah, I do it all.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about EndoSound's technology. How does it set itself apart from traditional endoscopic ultrasound system?
Sure. Um, well, a traditional system, as we talked about a little bit before, is has been around for a long time. They are expensive systems that not only require scopes, but these big sort of um, processor devices also that require space, that are in a GI suite. And again, the biggest some of the biggest challenges that they have are durability with those scopes, but also just flat out cost. So EndoSound addressed some of those drawbacks with lower cost solution. That was like our biggest sort of disruption. The other part of this, which is sort of underscored a lot of the times, but when you see the system, it really makes sense. I was telling you there's sort of a big processor and it has to go in this big space in a GI suite, and it's really hard to visualize if you haven't been in those things. But ours is our footprint is much smaller. We have a little standard box that creates the images and reads the images with software that can be run on a computer, but it's about the size of a hard drive. So it's hyper portable. You could take it, you could take it to one location and set up and do whatever you needed to do at that location, and you could then move it on to a different location. With a conventional system, that's simply a massive challenge. I
And
think the other, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, in terms of the space of a suite, just so people could kind of picture it, right? Whenever I think
Yep.
about a GI suite, so tell me if I'm calibrated still correctly, because it's been a little while since I've been in one at least awake, because normally whenever you go
Yep.
in, they've already got you semi-sedated. So
You bet.
anyway, so the last time I was in one, not as a patient, essentially I could picture it as about the size of where the boundaries are in the curtains of an ER, right? So it's like this, it's a very small, relatively small area. Unlike a typical operating room theater,
Right.
which could be, I don't know, five times, six times that same space. I mean, they're normally, size wise, a lot more spacious. So for an operating room.
So in general, you're absolutely right. ORs typically are much bigger places for lots of reasons. And GI suites can vary in size tremendously. So it really kind of depends on whether they took an existing structure and then bolted in GI, or they built out GI, the GI suites, with that plan in mind and the space available. So it really depends. Space in most healthcare arenas is always a premium. So anytime that you can kind of make an adjustment or make something smaller, it's always appreciated.
Yeah, I just think it's important to mention, especially whenever you're talking about the device, because you have this, big monster of a thing. It's
Right.
not as easy to fit it in the tiny little space where you got to also fit human beings that are doing the work.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, there is one other thing that I think is really important about what we can do, and it's a little bit of an interesting story. So and I'll summarize very, very quickly, but there's this idea of so there's two procedures that are typically done. There's a ton of these procedures, maybe 8-9 million a year in ambulatory surgical centers that are called EGDs. It stands for something. I'll say it, but I won't get it right, so I don't want to say it online. But it's a very long word. But it essentially is an exam where it's a regular endoscope that goes into your GI tract and goes all the way into part of your duodenum to do an assessment. But it's an optical view, so you only see what you can see, like you would see through a camera. And there's 9 million of it. There's lots of things that can go wrong in the GI tract. So doing a EGD is very common. The idea that we are now bringing, potentially having a EUS part of that EG, what we are calling echo endoscopy, we essentially boil it down to EUS enhanced EGD. So to allow doctors to do their standard EGD, but also do an EUS exam if they're trained in that way, and to look at those surrounding structures. Because again, you can't penetrate what you don't see with the camera. So you'll see the stomach lining, you'll see other parts that are going to be very important in diagnosis, but this extra added step where you do EUS on top of that allows you to see the structures that are behind that wall. So this concept has been around for a long time, and the challenge with it was never cost effective enough to be able to be done. And now with EndoSound, you can put our probe on the back of a EGD scope and do it whenever you want, or whenever the patient's indications call for it.
Very good. Yeah, I just looked it up. It looks, if medical terminology tells me correctly, it says esophagogastroduodenoscopy.
Yep. Yep. Duodenoscopy. Yep.
Yeah, there you
Yep.
go.
Yep. Yep.
So yes, I have to break it down per my medical terminology class decades ago, but yes,
For sure.
right. All right. So let's talk a little bit about how challenges and opportunities really have sort of helped you define the space that you play in, especially with your current role, right? So whenever you look at the marketing opportunities that you currently have, how do you sort of look at that both from a challenges and opportunities space, and then say, hey, look, here's more or less the direction that we should go in terms of messaging and positioning and things like that?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question, and it's a challenge to market medical devices, and the main reason is you're confined to regulatory and legal environment of what you can say and you can't say, and there's a lot of good reason why that exists. I think the main reason is you don't want to be making outrageous or any unsubstantiated claims where your device is, it does A, B, and C, and it doesn't do anything like A, B, and C, and it puts people at risk. So you certainly don't want to do that. But you can get creative there, and I think there's lots of room to breathe. And I think a lot of the things that we do, that others do as well, where you get stakeholders to talk about their experiences, that's some of the opportunity I think you can do with medical devices. There's lots of different medical device. So with any medical device, there's lots of different stakeholders who influence that decision. So I'm not just talking to doctors, I'm also talking to medical directors, I'm talking to billing people, I'm talking to finance people, and I'm not talking to them directly per se, but some of the messaging that needs to come about and the things that we learn, we need to involve them, because they aren't necessarily someone who I need to sell, but they could be involved in that overall decision to decide that this is a good opportunity, they want to take it on. So you need to understand, and they need to understand what the overall value brings to them. And I think the other part of this is, as much as it is always a real challenge for sure, but try as much not to talk about the features. And I think the legal and regulatory environment that we have, we always get into this sort of feature challenge, but I don't want to necessarily do that. I want to try to bring a value to them. Like, what does good imaging mean to you? Like, what can that enable you to do? And that's I think where the fun part of it is, trying to figure out how do we translate some of those things into the things that our users will care about.
Yeah. So I mean, so important to be crystal clear, but also it is so hard, and I see it both inside and outside of healthcare, right? I mean, I just recently consulted with a company where their website only spoke to the features and things that they deliver instead
Yep.
of solving the problem that the client has, and it was kind of an interesting sort of discussion, because you had lots of players sort of looking at, hey, look, I like those words, but then at the same time, if they're not going to deliver you more clients or more customers, then
Right.
let's think about the way that we're delivering.
That's right. Yep.
So what do you see as the future of endoscopic ultrasound technology, and how is EndoSound preparing for it?
Well, I think some of the future, and you're going to be shocked when I say this, is AI. And AI is already in GI a lot. It is, there are some academic forays into it. There's several companies that are, maybe more than several, and some of the big players are in it, and they're in it from everything from assisting the physician in recognizing abnormalities or structures they need to pay attention to. So something as simple as you might think it might do, but you got to train that AI, and that's not necessarily easy. And everything to training. So think about enhanced training with AI and helping people who learn, we'll just say EUS. It's very difficult to learn. It takes a lot of experience, and it takes time. And I think AI is one of those things where AI will pick up on the structures before you might pick up on it visually, especially in the beginning as you're learning, and really start to point it out. And so what you'll get is sort of this visual feedback between what the computer is recognizing as a structure of interest and what you then need to recognize as a structure of interest. So there's for sure AI, I think, and that development is only going to accelerate, I think, in the field. So lots to be excited about, I think, there.
Yeah, I definitely see how the technology aspect of this, could play a strong role, overall in helping physicians, look at structures, especially whenever it comes to, things that you just might not recognize, that all of a sudden the computer just says, hey, you might want to have a second look here.
Yep.
So yeah,
Yep.
for sure.
Yeah.
Can you share an example of how you've helped build brand identity for a medical device company?
Yeah. So when I came on with EndoSound, I'll just use the most recent example. I think with some of those other companies I was with at very established brands, but EndoSound is new, so it kind of gave me this opportunity to do that. There was a pretty strong awareness, certainly in a tight sphere of people in advanced endoscopy that was aware of what we're doing. And if I didn't mention this, which I should have before, shame on me, was the two founders for EndoSound was one is an advanced endoscopist or advanced interventional endoscopist, and the other was an ultrasound engineer. So as you can imagine, the marriage of those two created the cool product that they made. And so there was a lot of inertia that was built up from that, but it needed a boost. So I think most of the outreach that I've done at this point has been like grassroots and organic. We're not big enough to do anything, so the so-called omni-channel kinds of things. So we really try to focus, I think, on content and making content that's appropriate for, in particular, the key stakeholders. And I was talking about multiple stakeholders before, but we really focus on our financial and our physician users right now. It will certainly evolve and develop into those other key personas, but it was a development of who those people are, who those right targets are, and what the value is to this, as we were talking about before. Like, we wanted to make sure that the content that we created is driving value or is driving a recognition of what the product can bring in terms of value. So it was kind of paramount in my mind to help drive that brand. We did a little bit of look and feel in terms of slight changes to the logo and slight changes to the colors and those kinds of things, but not a whole lot. So I think we kind of have a unique look. So I like the way that went.
Very good. Yeah, and I for anybody that hasn't been to the EndoSound webpage, I think the animation on the webpage really kind of pulls together exactly what this thing is that we're talking about through, most of the conversation. But I wanted to focus the last few questions on you. So what's the
Sure.
greatest leadership advice that you've ever received?
Uh, let's see. One of them was, and it was back to that course that I took when I worked for the company, that sort of crash course. A lot of marketing is choosing what not to do,
Mm-hmm.
and that sits with me a lot. I think it's right. There are so many times where You get in conversations or you get in a big group and we're like, we can do this and we can go here, we can go there, we can do this, we can do this. But as a small company, we even have to be more choosy. But I think that adage and that thinking is really important across all kinds of companies. And you can be more successful by choosing the right things to do. Another one, and this is one that I sort of learned over time, but it's definitely a lot of me, which is when I manage people more to their strengths, and I try not to change their weaknesses. So the weaknesses are recognized, everybody recognizes, but I wouldn't spend, let's call it 20 or 25 minutes of a 30-minute review talking about why somebody needs to change.
No, which is interesting given most of my large corporate experience.
Right.
With performance reviews.
Right. Mine too. I simply don't think it makes any sense. I would focus on their strengths, and we have to be mindful of the weaknesses, but you got to find something else to fill the weakness if that's it. So the way I worked on and built a team was we had some people who were very strong in certain categories, and let's call it strategic, and we had some people who were excellent tactical, and the marriage of the two made the team work.
Right. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more on that one. What inspires you?
I'm a cyclist also, so I love watching cycling. I was lucky enough to kind of this summer to do a ride in the French Alps on some of the old Tour de France. I'm gonna, again, maybe a 25% of the people are going to listen to this are going to know what this is, but there were some old French routes that are in the Tour de France that are old classic climbs in the Alps, and I was desperate to do some of those famous climbs and was lucky enough to do it with a friend of mine, and it was astoundingly beautiful there. So I couldn't think of anything else. I think shifting gears a little bit, but yeah, you can kind of see what I did there. But shifting gears a little bit, I think great writing too in any form is another one. It's really hard to do well. Something I struggle with all the time. It's really, really hard. And to do it authentically these days is really, really challenging. So it's great to see it when I see it.
Yeah, I sort of question the thought process in wanting to do that though a little. I mean, I live in good Colorado, right? And there's a lot of very steep hill climbs that I see cyclists do quite frequently on weekends, and I wonder why.
What are they doing? Yeah, what are they doing? So I'll tell you, Don. I've done lots of climbs in Colorado, as you'd imagine. There's nothing like it is there. It's much harder there, number one, but it's just different. The mountains look very different.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the downhill, I'm all for. I mean, you want to turn the bike around and go the other way. I'm all for that. But
Sure.
It's the uphill I struggle a little bit with.
For sure.
What concerns you?
Climate change and my kids having to deal with a situation that we haven't fully comprehended, to be honest. That makes me nervous. I think about it. Not every day, I hope, but I think about it. I think another one is lack of grace given in any kind of discourse or any kind of conversation. There's all kinds of people. People come from all kinds of different backgrounds and motivations, and I try to give people the benefit of the doubt most of the time. So I don't like it when I don't get it.
Yeah, I think perspective, and I'm saying from different angles, perspective helps us all. and so I agree with that, because even if I don't agree with you, who knows? I might pick up something that I don't frequently think about. So
for sure,
for sure, yeah.
And just being open to that mentality, I think, it helps the conversation go, because then you don't have to worry about getting angry, and you don't have to worry about getting upset. And this can go in all kinds of ways. Like, I'm not just talking political. I'm talking about all kinds of aspects of your life. Like, just be open to listening.
Absolutely. Last question: what excites you?
My family doing well. All aspects and all parts of my family doing well. The great drum beat. Um, Feeling on a great climb. So, like you were talking about, why do you do this? It's a kind of a euphoric feeling, not euphoric like this is the greatest, because it's usually really painful, but you forget the pain and you just remember like how fun it was. I think an intellectual conversation that's open and honest is always it's always great, and I love having those. Beautiful art, as you can kind of, I'm not sure everybody would call these beautiful, but things behind me are some of the things that I've got. But those kinds of stuff.
Again, it all depends on where you're viewing it from. So thank you so much, Patrick Hurley, for being on the Life Science Success Podcast and for sharing with us everything that you're doing at ultrasound and at EndoSound, at ultrasound. And
Yep.
yeah, I greatly appreciated our conversation. I definitely wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you so much. Again, my pleasure. And it was really interesting to do this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.